Long before the Roman Empire rose to conquer the Mediterranean, there was another power in Italy, older, quieter, and far more mysterious: the Etruscans. They built cities before Rome had roads. They carved elaborate tombs while the Tiber still flowed through wilderness. And yet, today, we barely remember their names. Who were these people? Their language still eludes us. Their gods are only half known. Their history survives in fragments, buried beneath Roman myth, ruined temples, and forgotten hillsides. What we know comes not from their voices, but from their graves. Tonight, let's journey back to a world of painted tombs, whispering augurs, and shadowy kings. A world where fate was read in the flight of birds, and life was but a brief flicker before the eternal banquet of the dead. This is the story of the Etruscans, Italy's silent civilization. So close your eyes, take a deep breath, and fall asleep to the ancient mystery that came before Rome. Before the roads of Rome stretched across continents, before the legions marched beneath crimson banners, and before Latin carved its mark into law and language, there were others. In the hills and valleys of what we now call Italy, a different people rose. A people who built cities from stone and bronze, who worshipped gods with strange names, and who lived and died with a solemn sense of fate. They were the Etruscans, but now they are shadows. Even the Romans, who came to rule after them, weren't quite sure who the Etruscans were. Their own historians argued over it. Some claim the Etruscans came from the east, migrants from a distant land called Lydia. Others insisted they had always been there, children of the soil, as ancient as the land itself. Whatever the truth, the Etruscans were already powerful when Rome was still just a cluster of huts on a muddy riverbank. And yet, their story is nearly silent. As we drift into the past, imagine the landscapes of central Italy: gentle green hills rolling under a soft morning mist, olive trees stretching into the distance, and here and there, half-buried ruins, a broken arch, a worn stone path, or the moss-covered edge of a forgotten tomb. These were once the lands of Etruria. From around 900 BCE to roughly 500 BCE, the Etruscans flourished. They built thriving cities, mastered metalwork, traded with Greeks and Phoenicians, and ruled large portions of the Italian peninsula. Their influence even reached the early Roman kings. But somehow, despite their reach and their riches, the Etruscans would be mostly forgotten. No great chronicles remain, no epic poems, no legends passed down like those of Troy or Carthage. Their voices are gone. What we have instead are echoes, shards of pottery, carved sarcophagi, painted tombs, and a language that still refuses to speak to us. The Etruscan language is one of the great enigmas of the ancient world. It survives in inscriptions, over 1,000 of them, etched onto stone, metal, and ceramic. We can read the words. We know how they sound, but we don't fully understand them. The language isn't Indo-European. It doesn't follow the patterns of Greek, Latin, or Sanskrit. There's no Rosetta Stone to help us, just fragments and silence. This lack of understanding casts a dreamlike veil over everything they left behind. Their art is vivid, colorful, joyful, even wild. But without context, it's like looking at a beautiful scene through thick fog. Their gods appear in sculptures and frescoes, but we know little of their stories. Their cities lie beneath layers of soil, barely excavated, their secrets still held tight. It's as if the Etruscans are right there, just out of reach. And so we remember them not through their own words, but through the ruins they left behind, and through the Romans, who inherited much from them, and then quietly swept them from the stage of history. As you settle into rest, let your mind drift across those lost landscapes. Picture the stone streets of a city long buried, with ivy climbing over broken walls and birds nesting in temple columns. Imagine voices in a language you can't understand. Laughter echoing in a marketplace that no longer exists, prayers whispered to forgotten gods. The Etruscans lived in this world, built it, ruled it, and then slowly faded from memory. But for a little while tonight, let them live again, as we journey deeper into their world and listen closely to the silence they left behind. As we drift deeper into the past, the fog does not lift. Instead, it thickens, soft and impenetrable, wrapping around one of the greatest riddles of the ancient world: Where did the Etruscans come from? Even in antiquity, no one truly knew. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, believed they were migrants from Lydia in Asia Minor. According to him, a famine had once struck their homeland. A portion of the population, led by the son of a king, set sail west across the sea and eventually landed on the shores of Italy. There they became the Etruscans, a people born of exile. But another voice, that of Dionysius of Halicarnassus, disagreed. He claimed the Etruscans were native to Italy, an indigenous people who had always lived in Etruria, developing their unique culture over countless generations. Both theories have lingered for centuries, shaping how we view this enigmatic civilization. And yet, neither has ever been proven. Today, modern science offers a third possibility. DNA studies on ancient Etruscan remains suggest something more nuanced. Their genetics seem to align closely with other early Italic peoples. In other words, they were local, not foreign invaders. And yet, there are traces, subtle echoes in their customs, burial rites, and art that hint at distant contact, or perhaps a small, migrating elite that merged with native tribes. Like much about the Etruscans, the truth may lie somewhere in between. Their language only deepens the mystery. It is not Indo-European, the vast language family that includes Latin, Greek, Sanskrit, and most modern European tongues. Instead, Etruscan stands alone, a linguistic island in a sea of familiar structures. We can pronounce the words. We recognize names. We know numbers and some ritual phrases, but we do not understand them. The Etruscans left no literature, no surviving books, no myths written down, only inscriptions on tomb walls, on mirrors, on offerings, short, fragmented, and silent. 1,000 whispers we cannot quite decode. To understand who they were, we must go back even further, to the culture that came before them. Around 1000 BCE, in the wake of the Bronze Age collapse, a new people began to emerge in central Italy. Archaeologists call them the Villanovans. They were the Proto-Etruscans, iron-using, cremation-practicing, and already forming the seeds of a complex society. From their villages rose the cities that would later define Etruria. Towns like Tarquinia, perched on a ridge above the sea, known for its vivid painted tombs. Veii, just north of what would become Rome, a wealthy rival and trading power. And Cerveteri, a city of the dead as much as the living, with entire streets of tombs carved from stone. These early settlements grew into city-states, independent, often rivalrous, but linked by shared customs, language, and religion. They traded with the Greeks, with Phoenicians, with the mysterious peoples of the Western Mediterranean. And slowly the Etruscans came into focus, powerful, wealthy, deeply spiritual, and still utterly unknown. We rely on archaeology to tell their story. Cracked vases, scorched bronze, foundations of lost temples. There are no Etruscan chronicles, no histories carved in stone. Much of what we know, what little we know, comes from the Romans, who later absorbed them and often misunderstood them. The Etruscans are a people seen through the wrong end of a telescope, distant, distorted, and incomplete. And yet, their presence still lingers, like footprints in ancient dust. So as you lie back and drift deeper into this forgotten past, imagine a people rising from the ashes of the Bronze Age, shaping cities from stone, language from silence, and a civilization that would one day teach Rome how to be Roman, before vanishing into the mist. By the 6th century BCE, the Etruscans had built more than cities. They had shaped a world. Their towns, often perched on high ridges or nestled into fertile valleys, were carefully planned, with streets laid in grids, drainage systems, and public spaces carved into stone. These were not crude settlements. They were thriving urban centers, humming with trade, ritual, and art. Their craftsmen worked skillfully in bronze and iron, creating weapons, mirrors, tools, and statues that glimmered with meaning. Trade flowed in and out of Etruria, fine pottery from Greece, exotic goods from the East, and their own creations sent far beyond their borders. They were not an isolated people. The Etruscans stood at the crossroads of the ancient Mediterranean, quietly powerful. But what they built above ground was only half their story. Beneath the earth, they carved a second world, a mirror image of the living. These were the cities of the dead. Etruscan tombs were unlike anything else in the ancient world. They were not cold chambers of stone, but warm, painted homes. Entire necropolises, cities of the departed, stretched across hillsides, their roads lined with rounded tombs that looked like houses. Within, the walls were painted in vibrant color. Dancers, banquets, musicians, games, and families. All captured in motion, forever. Some tombs had beds, chairs, and carved beams on the ceiling. They weren't just graves, they were homes for eternity. Because to the Etruscans, death was not the end, but a continuation. They believed the afterlife mirrored the world of the living. The spirits of the dead feasted, danced, and traveled through shadowy realms. And so the tombs were filled with objects for the journey: mirrors, jewelry, fine ceramics, and even chariots. In these grave goods, we catch fleeting glimpses of daily life: what they wore, what they cherished, how they celebrated, and how they mourned. And always in the background loomed a deep spiritual presence. The Etruscans were a profoundly religious people. Their world was guided by fate, by omens, signs, and the will of the gods. They practiced augury, interpreting the flight of birds to discern divine will, and haruspicy, reading the entrails of sacrificed animals to predict the future. To us, it may seem strange, but to them, it was the heartbeat of life. Every decision, from when to plant a crop to when to wage war, was made only after consulting the signs. Their gods were both familiar and unfamiliar. Tinia, the sky god; Uni, the mother goddess; Minerva, the goddess of wisdom and war. They echo the Roman gods Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva. But the similarities are only skin deep. The Etruscan gods were darker, more elusive, more deeply tied to fate and death. They didn't just rule, they warned. Their art reflects this too. Frescoes show joyous scenes, but always with an edge of finality. Music and dance, but with funerary processions in the next room. A man raises a cup to his lips, while a demon watches quietly from the shadows. The Etruscans embraced life, but they never forgot that it was fleeting. To live, for them, was to prepare for death, and to die was simply to move to another place, a place with familiar comforts, family, and the ever-present eyes of the ones. So as you rest and drift deeper into thought, imagine walking down one of those ancient streets, not of the living, but of the dead. Stone doorways, painted walls, laughter frozen in pigment. A world where the line between life and death was soft and thin. This was Etruscan life, rich, spiritual, and haunted by eternity. There was a time, long before the Roman Republic, before the Empire, when the Etruscans ruled Italy. It was the 7th and 6th centuries BCE, the golden age of Etruria. Their cities rose proudly across the landscape, from the hills of Tuscany to the fertile lands of Campania in the south, and up into the wide plains of the Po Valley in the north. Though they were never unified under a single ruler, the Etruscans shared language, religion, and culture. At their height, they formed a league of 12 powerful city-states, each one sovereign, yet bound together by custom and ritual. Cities like Tarquinia, Veii, Clusium, and Volsinii were the beating hearts of this network. They built walls, temples, and roads. They minted coins and carved laws. Though not an empire in the traditional sense, the Etruscans held influence and wealth that stretched across the Italian peninsula. And they were not alone. They traded actively, intelligently, and widely. Greek pottery found in Etruscan tombs tells stories of shared myths and artistic inspiration. Phoenician glass, Carthaginian jewelry, and Egyptian amulets have all been uncovered in Etruscan graves. The Mediterranean in those days was not a distant world. It was a web of ships, ports, and marketplaces. The Etruscans were skilled navigators of this world. Their harbors opened to the Tyrrhenian Sea, and their influence reached from Corsica to Naples, from the Alps to the Tiber. Yet their greatest legacy may lie not in what they built for themselves, but in what they gave to Rome. For Rome was Rome, it was an Etruscan city in all but name. The early kings of Rome were Etruscan, or deeply influenced by Etruscan culture. Names like Lucius, Tarquinius Priscus, and Tarquinius Superbus echo through Roman legend. These kings oversaw massive public works. The Cloaca Maxima, a great drainage system that transformed a marshy basin into what would become the Roman Forum. They laid the foundations of Rome's temples, streets, and rituals. Much of what we think of as Roman, its architecture, its symbols, even its ceremonies, bears Etruscan roots. The fasces, a bundle of rods bound around an axe, symbolizing unity and power, was an Etruscan emblem long before it was carried by Roman magistrates. The toga, that most iconic of Roman garments, was first worn in Etruria. Even the grim spectacle of the gladiatorial games may have begun as an Etruscan funerary rite, combat offered to honor the dead. And yet, despite this legacy, the Etruscans were destined to fade. They never formed a single empire. Their city-states, proud and independent, often competed with one another. They lacked the centralized strength that Rome would later wield so effectively. Over time, rivals emerged: Greek colonies in the south, ambitious Celtic tribes in the north, and most dangerously, a small Latin city on the banks of the Tiber, growing in strength and confidence. That city was Rome. By the late 6th century BCE, the Romans overthrew their last Etruscan king. The monarchy ended, and with it, Etruscan power in Rome began to unravel. Slowly, one by one, their cities were defeated. Some were absorbed, others destroyed. Their names blurred, their stories buried, their pride forgotten. But for a moment in history, the Etruscans ruled. They shaped the land, they guided Rome's earliest steps. And though their voices were silenced, their influence still echoes, in stone and ritual, in the very bones of the eternal city. So let your thoughts drift now to a time before emperors and legions, when kings with strange names ruled from the hilltops, and the roads of Italy led not to Rome, but to Etruria. All things fall, even the most powerful civilizations fade, not always with fire and war, but slowly, quietly, like a dying breath on the wind. So it was with the Etruscans. For centuries they had flourished across Italy. Their cities thrived, their ships traded, and their rituals echoed from hilltop to hilltop. But by the middle of the 5th century BCE, their golden age was slipping away. From the south, a new force was rising, the Greek colonies of Magna Graecia. Settled along the coasts of southern Italy, these city-states, like Naples, Croton, and Syracuse, brought with them new technologies, new economies, and new ambitions. The Etruscans, once dominant in the seas, found themselves challenged at every turn. In 474 BCE, the tide shifted decisively. At the Battle of Cumae, the Etruscan navy was crushed by the Greeks of Syracuse. Their dreams of maritime control evaporated. The Tyrrhenian Sea, once an Etruscan highway, now belonged to others. Trade routes collapsed. Coastal cities weakened. And with that defeat, the Etruscans began their long descent. As pressure mounted from the south, new dangers stirred in the north. Tribes of Gauls, fierce and fast-moving, began to push into the rich lands of the Po Valley. Etruscan cities like Felsina, modern Bologna, were attacked, overrun, or simply abandoned. Northern Etruria fell into disarray, cut off from the southern heartland, and from the center came the most enduring threat of all: Rome, the small Latin city that had once borrowed Etruscan customs, kings, and process, was now expanding. No longer a student, it had become a rival. Then, an enemy. Rome began to swallow its neighbors piece by piece, city by city, and the Etruscans, divided and weakened, could not hold them back. The great cities of Etruria began to fall. Veii, once a powerful rival of Rome, was besieged for years before it finally crumbled in 396 BCE. Tarquinii, a city of tombs and art, resisted but eventually bowed. Volsinii, among the last of the proud city-states, was destroyed by Rome in 264 BCE. Its surviving population was relocated. The city was never rebuilt. One by one, the lights of Etruria were extinguished. And yet, even in defeat, their influence remained. Rome absorbed Etruscan lands, yes, but it also absorbed their culture, their religious rites, their symbols of authority, their temples, and even their language for a while lingered within Roman practice. But it would not last. By the 1st century BCE, the Etruscan language had vanished from daily life. It lingered only in sacred rituals, whispered by priests in ceremonies whose meanings had long been forgotten. The spoken tongue was gone, the written word undeciphered, and unlike Greece or Egypt, the Etruscans left behind no continuous history of their own. No Herodotus to record their triumphs, no Livy to shape their legends, no epic poems or chronicles, just tomb paintings, scattered inscriptions, and the fading memories of a people who once ruled. What we know of them now comes not from their own voices, but from the Romans, and even those accounts are colored by conquest. The Etruscans were portrayed as decadent, superstitious, or cruel, masks placed on them by those who had defeated them. Their true character, their dreams, their stories are mostly lost, and so the Etruscans slipped into shadow. A great civilization not destroyed in a single cataclysm, but gradually erased by war, by time, and by silence. Tonight, as you rest, imagine those last fading cities, the quiet streets, the empty tombs, the last words spoken in a language no longer understood. A world once full of music, ritual, and mystery, now vanished, but not forgotten, not entirely. For in ruins, in stone, and in stories like this, the Etruscans still whisper from the edges of history. The Etruscans are gone now. Their cities lie beneath quiet hills and vineyard-covered slopes. Their names, once spoken in proud markets and sacred rituals, are now worn smooth by time. But if you listen closely in the stillness between the past and the present, you can still hear them. Not in words, but in stone. The sarcophagi they left behind rest like sleeping guardians, carved with serene faces and gentle smiles. On the lids, men and women lie side by side, as if reclining at an eternal banquet. There is peace in their posture, a softness in the way they rest their heads. The Etruscans imagined the afterlife not as terror, but as continuation. A shared meal, a final embrace, a calm beyond the veil. Their bronzes still gleam, mirrors, statues, ceremonial objects, some small enough to hold in your hand, others grand and commanding. Cold, quiet metal, yet full of life. A charioteer frozen mid-motion. A god once prayed to, now staring silently from a museum shelf. And their tomb paintings, those fading scenes of joy and ritual. Musicians playing lyres, dancers moving in rhythm, birds flying over feasts. These were not mere decorations. They were messages, painted prayers to the next world. But we can only watch them now, not read them. Their meanings, like their language, slip through our fingers like mist. They left behind votive offerings, too, small tokens given to the gods. Clay figurines, inscribed bronzes, delicate amulets buried in sacred places. They speak of private hopes, forgotten illnesses, and thanks we will never understand. All of this remains, fragments, whispers, echoes of a civilization once mighty, now scattered across fields, ruins, and museums. And yet, in some ways they never left at all. Their influence lives on, woven deep into the very fabric of Rome. The fasces, a bundle of rods bound by leather, once carried by Etruscan kings, later became the symbol of Roman power, and centuries later, an emblem misused by others. The toga, once draped across Etruscan shoulders, would become the dress of senators and emperors. The practice of divining the will of the deities, of reading signs in nature and entrails, lived on in Roman temples. Even the gladiatorial games, so central to Roman identity, may have begun as Etruscan funeral rituals, offerings of blood to the dead. Their gods were absorbed, their architecture copied, their customs remade, but their voice is gone. We do not know their myths. We cannot read their prayers. Their language remains undeciphered, a silent wall between us and their true selves. We can pronounce the words. We can admire the script, but we don't know what they meant. The Etruscan mind, its stories, its humor, its grief, is locked away. And perhaps it always will be. They were once the masters of Italy, and now they are shadows. As you lie back and close your eyes, reflect on this truth, how even the greatest civilizations can rise in beauty rule in splendor, and yet vanish without a voice. No fanfare, no final word, just silence and stone. But in that silence, there is also peace. For the Etruscans believed death was not an end, but a passage. Their tombs were homes, their graves were gardens, and in their quiet way, they taught us something eternal. That memory does not live only in words. It lingers in the earth, in color, in metal, in the echo of footsteps across a buried street. If you found this story calming or intriguing, you can explore more forgotten empires and ancient mysteries right here on the Historian's Tome. Sleep well and dream of lost cities.